Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Stephen Gabar with the Kansas Council on Developmental Disabilities again, and I wanted to go ahead and start off our afternoon session. We are very fortunate today to have several secretaries and key members of the administration here to talk to us about their vision for employment going forward and to talk to us about some of the themes that we've discussed here at the conference. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the Secretary Tim Keck, to come up first, and the rest of you might come up and just join him as the seats here, and we can go from person to person then. Secretary Keck.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you all for spending the last couple of days here committed to the mission of this conference. I'll be brief. I think we have an hour or so, and there's several people up here, but I'll be brief. And I didn't hear what the governor said yesterday, but I'm pretty confident that he aligns with kind of the thought process that I think all of us have in the room. And I watched the last part of Jim Larson's speech right before lunch, and I'm going to just kind of read from the last slide that he put up, and it kind of sums up, I think, why all of us are here today and committed to employment first. And he talked about what he did in transitioning the system in Washington and in his community. And he said that if you believe that integration in the community, that the full inclusion is good, if you believe people with disabilities belong in the community, if you believe that the community benefits from people with disabilities, and if you believe it is unjust to treat people different because they have a disability, the answer is clear and convincing. People with disabilities need to work in the community, earning commensurate wages. I think that sums it up very well, and I would not be able to come up with those words any better, but I think that's the right sentiment and the vision that I think all of us up here have for employment in Kansas. We tried to work that into the next version of CanCare going forward. We have those concepts and those values in place. I think we do it in several ways. It's conferences like this, meetings like this. But this isn't it. It's the state, I believe, has a responsibility to move forward and convene some extension of this conference. In the back, you have your timeline with several concepts and concerns. I know transportation is probably the biggest one that we've heard of. We need to be committed to that. And at the end of Jim's speech earlier, and I'm sure the person's here, I don't see them, I don't know them, but he said, he's right out here, he said that if we're committed to those values and we're committed to putting the work in to do it, we can figure this out as we go forward, and we can get it right for Kansas. You have a lot of people up here who are committed to employment first, and I know that we work together and try to move the ball forward just a little bit, and I know they're all committed to doing that, even going forward. We can do it with tools like the materials that Crystal has, her life course materials. I'm a firm believer in those materials and the concept there. I think it's really simple, but expands a lot of opportunities and just crystallizes what's most important. And it's the person, the center of that. The person is the center of the discussion to those materials and their goals. I think it's almost not too good to be true, because it's true, but it's so simple, it should work for everyone. And so those are kind of what my vision are, the values that we've talked about. I think we can do it through the tools of working hard together, through the life course materials that Crystal has talked about. And I think that's the path forward, in part, in addition to the other things that the folks up here will talk about. So with that, I'll turn it over to John. Is that okay? Turn it over to John Hamdorf. He's the Medicaid director for KDHE.
Thank you, Secretary Keck. First of all, just thank you very much for inviting me to this. And I wasn't able to take part in the entire program, but I just have really enjoyed being here, listening to the sessions and talking to some of you and understanding some of the needs that we have in Kansas. I think this is just a great program, and I really highly commend the people who have worked so hard to make this program happen and make this conference happen. So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for all your hard work. You know, I kind of have a reputation for being brutally honest, and I'm not going to change that. So I just want to leave you with a couple thoughts, that I have. The first one, I want to make sure everybody understands that you determine what you want your life to be. That's not something that the state should do. That's not something that other people should do. You should be able to determine on your own what your vision of a good life is. And our job is to make sure that you have the necessary support to be able to achieve those goals and make that vision and dream come true. I know that I have wonderful staff that work in my agency, and I know Secretary Keck does as well too, so there's Secretary Meier-Hummell, but I feel that is our mission, is to make sure that we're in a position to support you to reach your best life. There's something else I believe very strongly in. I believe that no one should be paid under minimum wage. I don't, I didn't watch that video with you here today. I watched it with Rocky and some other folks last week, and it really turned my stomach. I've had the opportunity to work in a number of different jobs. I was even a sheriff's deputy for a while, had the ability to work with some folks with disabilities and some folks that were dealing with abuse and neglect. And the fact that we somehow allow Kansans to go to work and not be paid at least the minimum wage is it's something that repulses me. And I will work with whoever I need to work with to help us get to a spot to make sure that every one of the people that go to work and have a vision for their good life at least meets that minimum wage. So that's one thing that I have taken away. I think those are the two main key points, and I want to make sure that I share the stage with everyone. So thank you once again for inviting me. I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Dean Zajic, and I'm with the Kansas State Department of Education. Dr. Randy Watson, our commissioner, unfortunately wasn't able to make it today, and nor was our director of early childhood special education and title services, Colleen Riley, who I think many of you may already know or be familiar with. She sends her regrets, but her daughter is getting married in a couple of days in California, and they had some emergencies there that she had to go and tend to. So that said, I do want to talk a little bit, though, about the State Board of Education's vision for employment and for the success of all children in Kansas. I think many of you in this room are probably already familiar with one of the big initiatives that's new and just getting going, which is our the transition group the transition work group that came out of what was originally a proposed bill before the legislature earlier this year. That it was proposed to form a stakeholder group to pull together individuals to work on a transition bill of rights. And before they even got into all the hearings and everything for the stakeholder group in the legislature, the board president, Jim Porter, the State Board of Education board president, saw the proposal and said, well, why do we even need to go through all this? I mean, this is just the right thing to do. Let's just pull this together. So that work is beginning. I believe they're still in the process of pulling together all the members, but that work is moving forward. A little more broadly, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the State Board of Education's vision. And some of you that are educators in the room have probably been to at least one or two conferences in the last year or two where you've heard Commissioner Watson speak about the board's vision and the redesign and the Kansas's high but achievable goal to have every student be successful. And he is genuine when he talks about all meaning all. But for all to mean all also has to mean each. We have to differentiate. We have to have services and supports in schools that will meet the needs of every single student, not just students with disabilities, but every single student. Part of it is even changing that language of not talking about students with disabilities, students who are English learners, students who come from poverty, but it is meeting the needs of each of those students. And I think that's where, even more than that transition group, it's that broader push towards inclusive services where we're doing a lot of things that are already occurring in special education, but we're doing it for every kiddo. And because we're doing it for every kiddo, it's it's differentiation, but it's now becoming the norm, not the exception. And when you change a norm, that's far more important than changing a belief, because once it becomes normal for every student to have an individual plan of study, which looks a whole lot like what Crystal was presenting on yesterday. You can call it whatever the heck you want, but it's having a plan for every student of where they want to be, and creating a plan that will help them get there with all the necessary supports to help that individual get there. So it really is kind of an exciting time to be in education in Kansas. And again, just like everyone else, I don't want to take away the time from others. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Bob North. I'm the Interim Secretary of the Department of Commerce. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and special thanks to KCDD and all the partners that are here for inviting me. I'm a little bit of a novice in some of this subject matter, so primarily I want to listen today. I want to learn from all of you and from the rest of the panel, and truly appreciate that opportunity. The Department of Commerce, I think we're involved because we've got several significant workforce development programs. We've got a strong physical presence across the state. We've got 26 or so job service centers, workforce centers, where everyone can access programs, and that could be training programs. It could also be, we also do some programs where we try to match skill sets of employees with employers. And we've also got a robust kind of a web presence. And so there's lots of ways to access the workforce services programs. And there are federal programs that are specifically designated and intended to assist job seekers with disabilities. And so we're proud of that effort. We know we need to do more, and hopefully as the afternoon goes on and we get a chance, for me anyway, to learn more about some of these issues, then hopefully we can apply those lessons and be even more useful in that regard. You've heard already about Employment First. I know you know way more about it than I do. It's been around since 2007, and it competitive and integrated employment, and similar to what you previously heard, all jobs matter. All jobs should have an appropriate wage level associated with that work, and I think things are moving in that direction. Kind of taking a little bit of a historical look at commerce and some of these initiatives. I think in 2011 or 12, about 2.3% of our job seekers that we saw in the workforce centers self-identified as having a disability, and so we knew that number was undoubtedly higher than that, and so we have made special efforts to work with that. And I think the last statistic I saw, that 2.3 had gone up to about 14%. So we are improving. There's obviously room for additional improvement. Access, transportation, some of the things that you're going to hear about are all important, and I'm sure there are things that we're yet to hear about that will be useful to us. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Gina Meier-Hummell, and I'm the Secretary for the Department for Children and Families, and I am glad to be here. Many of you probably know this, but a couple of years ago, I was the commissioner at KDADS over community services and programs, and we obviously had the disability programs and the waivers within my commission at that time. So I'm glad to be back amongst friends and talking with you all today. Certainly, you know that for our agency, one of the core missions and values that we promote is employment amongst all Kansans, and we work really hard to ensure that Kansans have readily access and the needed skills and training to support them in their employment endeavors. So we certainly are glad to be here and help promote the need for employment for folks with disabilities. You all know what it means to be employed, how it promotes health, how it helps you feel like you're part of a community, how it helps you feel good about yourself. So all of those reasons are very important to us and very important to our fellow Kansans. So we certainly want to come alongside folks and make sure that we're doing everything we can to eliminate barriers, work across systems, help folks meet their individual employment plans. So for families out there who don't know about vocational rehabilitation services and haven't accessed them, or are in the process of transitioning your youth out into the workforce, please make sure you talk with us. We are excited to come alongside you and support you as young adults go into out on their own or perhaps into employment. So we're here to work alongside you and help with that transition. Certainly for those of you who work in this field as caretakers every day and support coaches and all the other things that you all do to take care of our Kansans with disabilities, we're grateful for your work and we're grateful for your mission and your calling. Can't think of anything more important than helping everyone feel loved, accepted, taken care of, and part of our society today. So we're just grateful to be here and grateful for the work that you do and for the opportunity to talk about employment.
We've been back here looking at some of the themes that are on the wall back here. And Rosie and I were kind of trying to sort those out. And one of the things, John, you mentioned about looking at ending subminimum wage and addressing that issue. And I think Secretary North, you had alluded to that as well. Would the other three folks that are up there have a comment or two? And
My comment is that I agree 100% with what John said, and Interim Secretary North said sub-minimum wage employment should end.
Certainly, I think we share a common value in that folks with disabilities should have employment and should be paid a fair wage for that. What I do recognize that there are many families. So I recognize that there are folks who have and work and support in the workshops, and that for some people that's an important value and an important piece. So what I want to say is I recognize that it's a difficult conversation. In addition to being certainly what we want to happen, we also recognize there's challenges and that there's a lot we need to do to strengthen our communities and our approach to serving folks with disabilities. So I recognize that there's a tension in the air, and I get it. So.
And this is the hard part about being the last one to go, because you don't want to just say ditto. But no, I can't agree enough with the statement, and part of it, like from our perspective with the Department of Education and what influence we can have in our schools and our districts, is working with them and helping them understand too that just like as they're working to find career opportunities and exploration opportunities for all students, that the same standard applies to students with disabilities. There's not employment light. Everyone should have the opportunity to have a job that pays at least a minimum wage and has some real opportunities for them to have a successful life that they want to live.
We have a question for Dean. They've been putting questions up here on the board, and you mentioned the IPS, the Individual Plan of Study. One person put up here, how does that fit into transition?
Okay, so that's a good question. So individual plans of study, for those that aren't familiar with it, This is an initiative that it's a state board of education outcome, actually, that began almost 2 years ago now. And it's now a requirement that all students, and not all students with disabilities, all students will have an individual plan of study beginning no later than 8th grade. Some districts are starting it earlier. That's up to their discretion. But an individual plan of study, for those of us that do come from the background of students with disabilities or that background, looks a whole lot like transition plans. And so in some ways, there's that group has a big leg up in what this should look like. But it's not the same thing. And just because you have a transition plan in your IEP, that doesn't mean you don't do an individual plan of study. They should absolutely be linked. They should complement one another for an individual kiddo. But part of this is, as we're talking about individual plans of study and what's called career cruising and these long-term goals and plans, part of it is what I was talking about with really kind of normalizing that process. This is something that's already been occurring or should be occurring for all students with disabilities. But now that it's transitioning to actually being done for all kiddos, because it is a best practice that is now becoming a requirement, because it is the norm, we think that it's actually going to afford those kiddos a lot more opportunities to explore career opportunities that they have a genuine interest in, beyond the norm. I don't want to say normal. Beyond what some children have been limited to in the past within the disabilities community. So that because it is the norm now for all students to explore different careers in their community, to whether that's aviation or the ag business, or maybe it's the family business, but it's whatever they want to do, and we think that that's really going to open up opportunities for them.
Thank you. This question would be for all of you, please. This was one of the gaps, and it was mentioned a few times that sometimes there's misinformation or myths about departments within the state of Kansas because there's no common language. Please speak about what you might consider moving towards so that we would have a common language and definition across all departments.
Thank you for the question, Rosie. A couple of different things. You've probably seen that our agency in particular is really focused on transparency, and that just a week ago we put our work plan online so folks could see kind of the global work of the various divisions within the agency. You probably know that we do child welfare services, and as part of that we have independent living services. So many youth in custody who have disabilities are transitioning out. So we have various work plans that we're trying to be at vocational rehabilitation, and each of our regions has work plans so folks can get past the immediate what you have right now, but understand the global nature of the organization and how the departments interact, how Voc Rehab interacts with EES and TANF and SNAP. So we've been trying to be more forthright about what our planning is, where we're headed. So I would say that's one area where you can kind of understand globally what all the agency is focused on. Certainly, I think another piece we have been working on since Governor Collier came into office is really working amongst the agencies and collaborating amongst the agencies. So we have a social service sub-cabinet that meets a couple of times a month to really talk through kind of these high-level issues. What are we doing around employment? What are we doing around access to care? What are we doing around mental health services? Where our systems connect to each other, and how can we make sure that the individuals who need those services are having a good interaction with the system, and that we make it as smooth as possible and remove barriers to services and systems. So I think there's a lot of good things that are happening. Certainly, I listened to the suggestions in terms of, can we do more around websites? Can we do more around access, one-stop shop. I think a lot of that makes a lot of sense, and we can certainly talk about that moving forward as part of our sub-cabinet.
Yeah, so I'll just follow. I don't think there's any question that the group that's up here sees eye to eye on most everything. When we don't, we talk about it and we sort it out. It's the mechanics of government that once you start directing down below, and if you don't give as good a direction as you possibly should or continue to reiterate it, it becomes more challenging. So I certainly, there's a lot of room for improvement, for cooperation among agencies. That will never end. It will always be a work in progress, but it really starts with me and with the other secretaries up here and the other leadership up here that is our focus, that we set aside our differences when there are some, and we work towards a common goal. But I know we're all up here committed to doing that, and it really starts with our leadership that is the direction we give, and it's really about communication and probably meetings, but that's what it takes to push things forward. So, and it's conferences like this where we'll hopefully get some notes about what's on the timeline. I spent some time back there before lunchtime because I wanted to see what was back there. And it's just the knowledge that comes with hopefully getting notes from this conference, and then probably holding other conferences as we go forward. I know this one is every couple of years. Maybe we do one on the interim year that the state sponsors and is involved in at some point. Something we'll take back, I know, at the next sub-cabinet for human services, and just continue to work on it. And I can tell you, I know we're all committed to that effort.
Yes, and I'll echo that. I know particularly at the kind of the staff level, there are several programs and projects that touch upon all of the agencies up here, and so staff are embedded in working together every day on these projects, which are vitally important. And over the past, I don't know, 8 years, 7-8 years, I think that kind of cooperation has improved and increased. I'm not at the same sub-cabinet that the rest of these secretaries are, but I'm on the Economic Development sub-cabinet, so it's the Department of Labor and Commerce and Revenue and Revenue. So we do talk about workforce development issues, and that's really one of the most critical and vital aspects we think to keeping the economy in Kansas healthy. So there is a true effort to work together, and Tim's right, the tone gets set by the people sitting at this table, and so we want to assure you that it's important to us.
Okay. Obviously, echoing the comments from before, I think Governor Collier has done a really nice job of trying to get the agencies to work better together. The other thing I'd like to call out that I think that he's been extremely passionate about, and it's right on point, is that we need to engage with our stakeholders more. So as part of the Lieutenant Governor's Working Group, we've continued on and really tried to develop a routine protocol to make sure we're meeting with stakeholders, because honestly, you guys that live and breathe and work this every day, you're going to provide some great options, some great solutions to the problems that we face today. And plus, you're going to give us visibility into things that maybe we don't have insight into. So I think as part of this process is understanding the points that need to be addressed, when they need to be addressed, and how they need to be addressed. And I think that's going to it has to be collaborative between not only the agencies, but also the stakeholder groups and the individuals in the program, so we know what your needs are and make sure that we can develop policies and programs to address those needs.
Yeah, and I think I would just echo that too. I mean, it's the best thing, and the best thing that you and others can do is to continue to provide that feedback, regardless of which entity or who it is that you're working with at the state level, or as it kind of trickles on down, because that information does get relayed back. And I know when we talk state government, sometimes things can seem like they're happening very slowly, but it does happen, and there is a genuine interest by everyone, both up here and in the agencies, to see that progress, and certainly working towards speaking the same language and having a coherent message and service plan is part of that. So the feedback is encouraged and welcome.
We were talking about Project Search and then Adult Project Search, which was actually funded through a DEI project with Department of Commerce on a federal grant that had some really great outcomes for our youth and older youth, as well as we had a presentation here on VocaFit at this conference, which people really seemed to like that, as well as a transition app that was developed to help with transition youth. And then, of course, just the underlying theme of the life course tools that we've incorporated into this conference. And I guess we're looking at how can we some way that maybe we could require some of those pieces or make sure that those pieces were available to people that wanted to access those kinds of tools.
So I'm a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that certainly we value is choice. And so anytime when you start talking about require, it makes me a little nervous because I know we need to maximize folks' choice in the matter. I do recognize that there are a lot of great tools that we can certainly talk about and bring into play and bring into action. We certainly love the lifespan and the underlying model. And I think that that's really critical to moving forward. So I think that we're always looking for opportunities to strengthen the transition planning and the options that are available. So my staff are here, they're amongst the crowd today, so we'll certainly be talking about what else we could be doing.
So I'm going to sound like I work for Life Course at some point, but we met with Crystal. That's probably been a year or so ago now, maybe not quite that long. And while I certainly am not advertising for them or making a pitch for them, it's things like that I think make it easier for folks as they move through the process. And it also happens to be person-centered, which are, to me, the most important piece of it. Is it's simple that I think you can use it in any really realm. I think anybody can use it for setting their goals, and I think that's why it works so well. I think Steve, maybe you or Craig called it iPhone simple when we first met about it, and I think that's part of the appeal and the reason it works so well. But it's things like that and processes like that we obviously need to continue to work on. And I agree with Secretary Meier-Hummell that anytime you start making requirements, it becomes difficult. To me, it's better if it becomes the standard of care, so to speak, or the best practice. It's better if it's just seen in that way as opposed to the state requiring or the government requiring somebody to do something. But if you can make it the best practice or the standard of care, that's where we need to drive it. And I think it's our responsibility as government bureaucrats to find those areas and maybe help incentivize or drive things in that direction. But really, it's more about the people that we serve and the choice they have and what works best for them. Because it may be that life course doesn't work for everybody, but something else does. So when we start adding requirements to things, it becomes dangerous. So anyway, I'll stop my my infomercial for life course materials now for a while. Sorry about that, Crystal. But
this one would be for John. We had several people ask if there's any way we could increase the retirement age on Working Healthy and the work program. I know that one's a tough one, but please speak to that.
You know, I think one of the most important parts of leadership is to know when you're over your head and when you have a great person in the room who can really address this question. So if it's okay with everybody, I have Mary Ellen Wright, who's just like my knowledge expert. Do you mind if she takes that? Because I want to make sure we get the appropriate and the accurate answer versus my bumbling.
I think that'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Just to let you know, that is actually a federal rule. That was part of the original legislation. The federal government, when they passed this, stopped it at 65. So we do agree with you. And several years ago, we actually amended our 1115 waiver that operates CanCare. We submitted an amendment, and that was one of the things we asked for, to be able to waive this age limit, because people work beyond 65. Some people want to. So unfortunately, whether it was because of that or a couple of other things that we had in this amendment, CMS told us they would not approve that. And CMS, by the way, is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they're our oversight agency, and they do have to approve everything we do. So rather than tell us what they didn't like about our amendment, they basically asked us to withdraw it. And we said, no, we won't withdraw it. We'll just leave it there. And it just sat there for several years. So things change, people change, and here in the state, with the federal government, maybe we could try that again and see if they're more amenable this time.
My next question is really for all of you and kind of a general, we had about 2 or 3 themes here, and I'm going to try to combine them. We seem to have some issues with all of these great things that we've got up here on the wall. We've got things like Families Together, the Working Healthy program, Centers for Independent Living. I mean, these are all really good programs, as well as our workforce centers, but we don't think enough people are getting referred into those systems and actually utilizing those systems. And so there were actually about 2 or 3 questions in that area that a lot of our independent living centers really could help people a lot more, but they're not getting the referrals into it, and it's the same with Families Together. And even the workforce centers, I've been talking to some of the folks there, that they're just not seeing the traffic. And I don't think that's just because we have 4% unemployment, because we still have a lot of people that are unemployed. And so I guess how do we get more people utilizing the good services that we already have?
I'll start with that. I think certainly we feel that same thing every day too, even within our own agency, that there are folks who come in for one service and another part of our agency could assist them, and they're, for whatever reason, we're not even having sometimes that communication internally. So we actually have internally started having integrated service team discussions again around families and individuals who could benefit from cross programs. And so I'm hopeful that as we have those conversations internally about what else could they benefit from within our system, and then our intent is to say what else could they benefit from that's outside of our system, that's perhaps within our sister agencies. And so we'll start to have those conversations across the state agencies. But I absolutely agree with you. I think we have to figure out a way to get the knowledge to folks who need access to services and to understand the various services that exist within our communities to help individuals. And so certainly we've been traveling around the state, talking with communities, talking with stakeholders, and listening, doing a lot of listening about what's working, what's not working. So I think we'll continue to talk about access to care, because I really think that that's what that's talking about, is whether it's access to mental health, whether it's access to the SILs, whether it's access to Families Together. There are lots of people who could benefit from those, and so we have to be engaging and having constant communication in the various communities and at the state level to make sure that we're accessing all of those systems and quite frankly, getting the benefit of those various services to the families who need it. So I just think it's almost one of those things you can't overemphasize, is communication and understanding the resources that exist to help individuals, and continuing to educate yourself so that you know what's available in communities, what's available in regions, what's available in certain parts of the state, and even what's not available, so we can continue to grow services where they need to be grown.
I would echo a lot of that information. And I know for us with the Department of Education and a lot of the services that we work with and help to support, like Families Together, it's one is, people don't know what they don't know. And I don't know about the rest of you up here, but there's been a lot of turnover in schools as well as in the agency and such. And I know that's something that's happened a lot throughout the state. And so when you have new people coming on at all levels, there's always a learning curve. And so it's not enough to tell them once, what resources and what things are out there, but it's a constant process of educating everyone in the field as to what resources are there. It's also a process of making sure that everyone who needs to know knows, because sometimes these aren't Again, I'm going to go back just because we're talking education here. It's not for the special education staff to know all of this stuff. A lot of these resources and things are the kinds of resources that, whether you're the counselor in the district or just the second grade teacher, it doesn't matter. I mean, these are resources that you should have on your radar, so that if you have a particular child that would benefit from this particular service from this particular center, you're making that connection in your mind, and you're helping enable the parent you're helping the family make that connection, because families coming in, they don't know, and they shouldn't have to know. It's not on, the burden's not on them to know all these resources. I mean, many families do take it on, but we have to, as at the state, have to remember that the burden isn't on you all. It really is on us and those that we work with to ensure that they're communicating the information out.
Sure, and I think I can speak specifically more my area of purview, if you will, or the purview I have within the Medicaid program, within our CanCare 2.0, within our ideas, when we conceptualize this with Secretary Keck, is this idea of social determinants of health and community engagement. Really, it's really what it is with our first version of CanCare, a lot of the folks that we served didn't have a community level resource to help them and guide them through the resources available in their communities. And really, when we talk about social determinants of health, that isn't just employment, that also is housing, it's also food security, it's also safety. It covers a broad breadth of resources. But the idea is that, we're really looking to be able to transform this program into a vision where that people have a community level resource that is aware of these opportunities, and they're able to connect those people with those resources. We're always going to have a challenge in Medicaid because we're always limited on what we can and cannot spend direct federal funds towards. But the idea is that when you have somebody who's engaged assisting an individual in the community with knowledge of that community, they'd be able to connect that person to more resources than somebody outside of that community trying to just manage medical care. And that's really where we're driving the program to go, is really this whole person care model driven by an individual personalized service plan that's dictated by the individual and that we are executing on. So I think that's one of the ways that we're trying to connect some of the community level resources going forward with our vision of CanCare.
Steve had mentioned the workforce centers, and I guess one thing that I would add is that the workforce service centers and the local workforce boards should not be passive. They should be communicating their programs that might be applicable to disabled job seekers, and so obviously we need to do a better job with that, and I know we are doing some things in that area, and so we'll continue to ramp those up so that more people understand the services that we've got available, and that can help either provide training or make that connection with the job.
I'll just add real quick. I'm going to reiterate much of what John said about, as we developed CanCare 2.0, work opportunities was a big part of our discussion in developing that. And part of this discussion goes back to what we talked about earlier in the agencies, all of the agencies implicated, including some that aren't here, labor probably, and some others, that we can work together so we know what each of us does. We have some really good people like Mary Ellen who have a really good idea of what we're doing, but we need to understand it and communicate it amongst ourselves better. And again, we have room for improvement there, and I know that we're all committed to that improvement.
This one here is for Gina. I wanted to know, on all the Kansas sides of disabilities and all that, if there was a way of getting them out there without them getting hurt or coming into the community of helping each other out.
So talking about vulnerable adults and how do we keep folks with disability safe? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the question, Crystal. Certainly part of the agency works in adult protective services, and I think part of what our conversation continues to be around in adult protective services is certainly strengthening the safety net for both children and the adults who have disabilities or can be vulnerable at any time. So we certainly continue to have regular conversations about what else we need to be doing to ensure people's safety. So as you all have thoughts about this, if you certainly have gaps or things that you're worried about, don't hesitate to contact the Protection Report Center within the agency. We certainly have a team of dedicated staff out in all parts of Kansas working to assure safety of those individuals. So thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Jana with the Kansas Youth Empowerment Academy. I have a question about the ADA, and my particular focus for this question is with the Department of Education and the Department of Commerce. With the ADA, it's 31 years old, I believe this year or last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, people who know. And so I heard a statistic that said that it's going to take another 30 years for the ramifications, or not the ramifications, that's negative, the paradigm shift to be completely made so that people with disabilities are embedded in employment as a natural occurring process. And it's just assumed. So I want to know at the state level, what are your departments doing to facilitate this, this paradigm shift? Because 30 more years is long. I'm 47 and I got a job, but I'm worried about the youth coming up. Thank you.
Yeah. So no, that's a fantastic question, and I'm familiar with ADA. I don't know when ADA was passed. I know when, I can tell you when IDA was passed, which was around the same time. But to your question, that shift at the societal level of where it becomes the norm for all persons to be included. I think I don't know the when that we get there, but what I can talk about is what we've seen just in terms of from where we've come from. I mean, you look back in the 76 or so, well, 75, 76 when IDA was first passed, and some of the 10, 20, 30 years after that of the requirement that children be served in the least restrictive environment, i.e. with their peers in a general education setting, and really putting that on people's radar so they're having to think about it. And because that's the first step, is just understanding that what you're doing now, having the children in a separate room, receiving separate services, that should not be the norm. You have to change whatever you believe they are capable of. You need to get it in your mind that that is not how the world needs to look, should look. And if you look at, just speaking specifically to Kansas, if you look at where we've come and where we are now, almost 80% of our children are served now, students with disabilities are served in the least restrictive environment the majority of their time in the school system. And what that means is that they spend most of their days and receive most of their services in the general education setting, not in a pull-out setting. That's not, but that also means that there's still a long ways to go. It also means that that's not the same in every single district. There's a lot of variance, and some people do that better than others. But the goal is to get to a point where the norm is for all kiddos to be served in the general ed classroom, but with the supports they need to succeed in the general education classroom. But the cool thing about that is that once, and this is where it pays dividends when we're talking about employment and the life, and just generally life after pre-K through 12, is once everybody else is used to just having a realistic view of what the world looks like, and the kiddos and all the people that are there, when they're used to interacting with them, when they are used to completing school projects with them, you don't have these weird prejudices where you think that, well, I can't hire a person with a disability because they can't do this or they can't do that. It's because they've never experienced life with these individuals. They have these preconceived notions of what people are capable of, and that carries through. In fact, I was just at a school tour 2 weeks ago, and it was a tour where the elementary school, the middle school was implementing a phenomenally inclusive practice of co-teaching. I mean, you go into these classrooms and you really couldn't tell who was a student with disability, who wasn't. You couldn't tell who the special education teacher was or who the general ed teacher was because of the way they were working together and collaborating. But what they shared with us was that, because this was kind of a building by building thing, the way they put this together, what they shared with us was that the result of this was that kiddos then would go to the high school, and in the high school, they were still doing pull-out, and it looked different there. And then you had the kids self-advocating for themselves because they said, well, wait a second. And I'm not talking just the students with disabilities. They're talking about all students. We're saying, well, wait, why is Jimmy being pulled out, and why is he going over here and getting services? That's not how it used to be. Why are we getting services over there? Why are we doing it differently? And that caused the high school to have to rethink how they provide services. So, and I think it does trickle up as you move on. So I don't know the when we get there, but I do think that there's progress being made.
Something was mentioned a little bit ago, I guess, from the timeline thing about the project search about a federal grant or something, that it was ending for the adult version. Does this mean that I was hoping they were going to up the age because they capped it at 30. Like my son is over that, but still would be very helpful for it. Does this mean that the whole adult version of it is ended because they said something about a grant being stopped, if I heard that right?
I'm Cheryl Locker. I'm the statewide project search for Kansas. And the program that they're referring to is the site in Salina that was using that funding to run their adult program. That one, unfortunately, is no longer to accept adults because we have lost that funding. Project Search as a whole is site specific and doesn't get any federal funds for any of the other programs, so it won't affect any others. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Samantha Lane. I'm a job developer, and this question is for Gina also. I understand that this question might come off as a little bit pointed, but I do mean it just with curiosity. Who does VR consider their customer? Is it the provider or is it the consumer?
Certainly the consumer is our focus, always.
So I guess the why to that question is the consumer, of course, is the person in the center that everybody's working to support, yet the customer that's getting reimbursement for the services is the provider. And so there might be some room for discussion there, I guess.
You're welcome to set an appointment with me if you want.
One comment for the education. When is it the philosophy going to become for our SPED students to start incorporating vocational training that can be started at the preschool level and written into the IEPs instead of the IEPs having to be concentrated on curriculum based? That's not helping these students prepare them for after school.
That is a fantastic question, and you are spot on. As part of the kindergarten readiness work, which is one of the newer, I say new, it's been a couple of years, but the board goals, State Board of Education goals, exactly what you're bringing up is we are at the point now where that question has been asked, and we're thinking about it as we are developing materials, resources, and guidance. I don't think we have a good answer yet. I really like what Stephen and them have at the back of the wall there, where it really is from birth all the way through the continuum of your lifespan. I mean, that is how you have to think about it. Everything builds on something else, and so you can't. It's not enough to start at kindergarten or 8th grade or anywhere else. If you're only starting there, then you've already left out so many of these skills. We were in Crystal's breakout session the other day, and I was talking to someone afterwards, or maybe it was, no, I'm sorry, it was Crystal who said it, made the point about, well, wouldn't it have been great if during daycare, the kid learned that you shouldn't take something else from somebody else just because, just that normal interaction, rather than having to learn that on down the line. It builds on each other. So where we are now, though, is we're aware that there's a conscious effort to include those skills and resources there in the IEP and in the curriculum more generally for all kiddos, but we are still figuring out what that looks like.
Okay, I'm glad to know that this on the state level that thought process is starting, and that's good.
And just kind of like some of the other stuff that was said, if anyone in here does have suggestions or resources, because we don't know what we don't know, we welcome any information or thoughts that we could incorporate, and you can always email those to us through our state's website.
As you have your conversations, because through all your answers, you've always a consistent theme has been we have to have these conversations. We have to get together and work things out. And I would like you to keep the Kansas families in mind. I know of a family that has adopted children from the foster care system that came in as medically fragile. And then they've also adopted some other more typical siblings, but now as the services that the medically fragile children are qualified for, but due to whatever circumstances, they are not continuing to receive as they have gotten older. Issues have come up with the trickle down for the rest of the family, not just because the parents have to put more attention and more effort and energy into meeting the needs of part of the family. The other children are having issues, and they had to call 911 recently for their 8-year-old who was stating that she didn't want to be around anymore. And this 8-year-old had to go to the ER to be seen to help her get through this. And this 8-year-old had already been in counseling for at least a year and is still, again, receiving counseling and on medication. It's the lack of services that have diminished over the years because nobody has paid enough attention or has deemed it not important enough, is affecting all families, all members of all families, not just the disabled or the ones receiving direct or qualified for the direct services. It is a trickle out, rings in the pond. It gets us all. And this family feels that their quality of life, their good life, is being sacrificed because of the circumstances that are beyond their control.
I appreciate your comment on that, and you're absolutely right. It's these issues, they don't affect just one individual. It's how does it impact the entire family, and then that's where it's incumbent upon all of us to figure out how we can support everyone. There's a quote that comes to mind, and I'm going to kick it back over to Stephen so we can ask the next question. But there's a good quote by H.L. Mencken that says that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And that's just it. That if there's not a silver bullet, it does take a village, a community, a family, all of us working together to meet the needs of these families.
One thing that I think that I would like to say for the people that are forming subcommittees, the people that are forming group advisory committees, that I think is so important that helps with that issue is to include families at the table during planning. I have been on committees where I'm at the table after, at the review. And that, while I appreciate the nod to families at that point, families need to be involved in the development process so that when people that are on committees that are making regulations, that are forming policies, you know, with the very best of intentions, you know, they're coming up with procedures and things, but that family voice at the table says, okay, wait, have you thought about this? Because this is how it would affect a family if you did it this way. And so I think that statement of we don't know what we don't know is so very true. And so including families when you form those groups, families have to be willing to say, yes, I will sit. And that's hard for families that are strapped anyway, emotionally, but families need to be involved in the formation of that, in the formation of that process, so that later, after we try the things, we don't end up and say, oh, well, let's go back and try again. If we have the family at the beginning, I think that helps. So thank you.
My question is more, I guess, partly for Secretary Keck and partly for all of you. But we know that the success of community-based employment for people with significant disabilities and for others as well is a truly good job coach. And, you know, I've always told people that a good job coach is part trainer, part psychologist, part social director, part MacGyver, and invisible during all those things. And they're doing that for what, $9, $10 an hour, when they could make $17 an hour at Chick-fil-A. And hopefully they're at Chick-fil-A helping someone earn that $17 an hour. But I really wonder if you're willing, I think there are maybe things that Commerce might add in terms of incentives or things like that, that would develop a career ladder to help people who have these amazing skills. Right now, for many of them, the career ladder is, I teach someone how to get a job at Chick-fil-A, and then I take the supervisor's job at Chick-fil-A, and I'm now making $20 an hour, and I'm out of the field.
So I want to make sure I understand your question. I think I do, but I want to make sure you're talking about the career ladder for the job coach is what you're thinking. Okay. And so that, as you all may know, we are a provider at KDADS as well. We operate really 5 separate hospitals throughout the state, among other things. And that's one of the things, I think you make a great point. That's one of the things that I found, that if you can provide people not just a job, but a path forward, whether it's to stay with you or some way to get some education that they can move on in their life, that you're much more likely to recruit them and more likely to retain them. So I think your point is well taken. And there are things, efforts that we've made internally. I think it's certainly applicable for a job coach and people helping others in their job too. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I'd just like to add just a little thought on the end of that, is that, you know, workforce development is a challenge across the board. I don't think it's just with job coaches. We see it a lot too with medical personnel. We see it with people delivering non-medical services in the home and community-based settings, where you're exactly right. You know, it's hard getting people the training they need. It's hard getting them the background checks. It's hard getting them, you know, to the point where they're ready to live with services. Then by the time they get there, the salary isn't always commensurate with what we're asking them to do. This has got to be one of the highest priorities, and it's not just in Kansas, it's in every state, is how do we develop a competent, capable workforce and keep them in those jobs going forward so we can take advantage of the experiences that they have and that tenure. So thank you for your comment.
I have a comment. It's an education comment. And I know part of the issue is because of the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But one of the things that I see when working with youth is they go to school, they get services. If they're struggling, the services just kind of automatically appear. They get to the end of high school, they get out of high school, and that's not how the real world works. And so we have to do a better job of helping youth understand that in the real world, you have to self-advocate. Because most youth that I work with, they get to the end of their high school and they don't realize that services just aren't going to automatically appear. And that creates a lot of problems for them when they get out of high school.
Thank you for that comment. And there again, I mean, there's so many of these these comments are just spot on. Because yeah, you're hitting on a key point that I know at the department we are making a concerted effort to try to in turn work with our districts and our special education directors throughout the state to understand that as you're developing an IEP and as you're developing supports, that those supports are being used appropriately. Like, you know, when you have a parent or someone assist a child that is there to support them to enable them, but not to be a crutch or to actually to set up a situation where they will then eventually fail because they've never had the opportunity to be challenged. I think it was that during the video, the documentary that we watched a little while ago. It was Joe. I wrote this down because I thought it was just such a great quote that the greatest disability is low expectations. That as an IEP is being designed and those goals are being set, that they are high but achievable expectations, and that the ultimate goal is always to have them calibrated so that that child, that person is able to be successful and have a successful and happy life after school.
I think we need to give a big round of applause for our panelists here and thank them for coming and joining us.